Welcome back after a long lecture, where we searched for tour documents within a certain distance from a certain point using geospatial queries. Now in this lecture, let's use geospatial aggregation in order to calculate distances to all the tours from a certain point. And so just like before, let's actually start by defining the route so that we know which data we're going to be working with. So router.route, and this time I'm going to call it simply distances. And then the data that we need is the latitude and longitude of the point where the user currently is. So in our previous example, that was LA. And then let's also allow the user again to specify the unit. Okay, and then here the route handler function. Now this time here we do not need the distance parameter as we had it right here, because we're not going to be searching for a certain radius. We're really going to calculate the distance from a certain point to all the tours that we have in our collection. So the handler is at tour controller, and it's going to be called getDistances. So we don't have that yet, and so let's create it. So catch async, and then of course mark the function as async as well, because we already know that we're going to use the aggregation pipeline, and so by the time we're going to be using await. And so the beginning of this function is actually quite similar to the get tours within one, and so let's go ahead and just copy all of this code. Okay, so we have some similar units, then we also need to get the latitude and longitude, and we also need to create this error in case there is no latitude or no longitude. Right? Now this one here does not apply, and also we don't have the distance. Okay, and so let's now do the actual calculation. And so just like before, in order to do calculations, we always use the aggregation pipeline. And remember, that is called on the model itself. So tour.aggregate. All right, then let's await that and save it into the distances variable. Okay, and so then here, remember, we passed in an array with all the stages of the aggregation pipeline that we want to define. Now for geospatial aggregation, there's actually only one single stage, and that's called GeoNear. So this one. Okay, so again, this is the only geospatial aggregation pipeline stage that actually exists. And this one always needs to be the first one in the pipeline. Okay, so keep that in mind, that GeoNear always needs to be the first stage. Something else that's also very important to note about GeoNear is that it requires that at least one of our fields contains a geospatial index. Okay, and actually we already did that before. So let's again take a look. And so our start location already has this 2D sphere geospatial index on it. And since we're using this start location in order to calculate the distances, well, that's then perfect. Okay, so if there's only one field with a geospatial index, then this GeoNear stage here will automatically use that index in order to perform the calculation. But if you have multiple fields with geospatial indexes, then you need to use the keys parameter in order to define the field that you want to use for calculations. Okay, so keep that in mind. But again, in this case, we only have one field, and so automatically that start location field is going to be used for doing these calculations. So what do we need to pass into GeoNear? Well, first we need to specify the near property, and near is the point from which to calculate the distances. So all the distances will be calculated between this point that we define here and then all the start locations. And so this near point here is of course the point that we pass into this function with this latitude and longitude. Okay, Now we need to specify this point here actually as GeoJSON. And so that's just like we did it before, where we need to specify the type as point, and then specify the coordinates property. And as always, the first coordinate here is the longitude. So longitude, and then the second one, the latitude. And let's multiply both of them by 1, simply to convert it to numbers. So this is the first mandatory field, so near, and the second one is the distance field property. So distance field, and so this is the name of the field that will be created and where all the calculated distances will be stored. So let's simply call this one distance. Okay, and so actually that's it. That's all the fields that are mandatory in this GeoNear stage. And of course we can add other stages here, and we're actually going to do that a bit later, but for now all I want to do is to really see the results of this working. Okay, so let's again copy this result here, or sending these results, and here let's then send the distances, and also this one we don't need. Okay, so we're ready to start. Keep in mind that at this point we didn't use the unit, but don't worry about that, we're going to do that in a second. But again, first I really want to see this working. Remember that the route is now distances. And so let's just copy this one here. Actually, I will save it also. So into the tours, let's say get tours within radius. All right, and so this here is called distances, and we do not have this and also not this. So just the coordinates and then again the unit. So let's take a look, and we will now get this error. And so remember how I said that GeoNear always needs to be the first stage in a pipeline. But if you now take a look at the code, you might think that actually our GeoNear stage is currently the first stage of our pipeline. Because right here, it actually looks like it is, right? There's nothing before this, and so why do we get this error that GeoNear is not the first stage in the pipeline? And actually, it took me a bit of time to figure this out, because this has something to do with a piece of code that we wrote a long time ago. So that's here in the tour model. And if we go down here, I think, so yeah, so right here we have this aggregation middleware. And remember that what this did is to actually always add this match stage here before all the other stages. And actually we have this console.log here. And so indeed, you can actually see the entire pipeline down here. Okay, and so you see that we first have the match, and then the GeoNear phase here actually only as the second stage. And so it actually makes sense that we get that error. Now we could go ahead and change this middleware here and say that if GeoNear is the first operator in the pipeline, then simply do not do this here. Okay, but that's a bit too much work for this use case. And so all I'm going to do is to get rid of this middleware. Okay, so give this a save, and now let's try it again. And so now we get our tours, and now it should have that distance field on them. So let's search for that. And indeed, here it goes. So distance, and then this huge number here. And it is this big number because actually it's calculated in meters. Okay, so this result comes in meters. And so let's first of all convert this one to kilometers. Okay, later on we will then also convert it to miles, because remember we specified the unit to miles. But for now the easiest solution is to actually convert it to kilometers, because all we have to do for that is to just divide it by 1000. Okay, and then also what I want to do is to really only get the distances and the name of the tours. So get rid of all the other clutter that we have here and really only focus on the distances themselves. So for that, as you might remember, we can use the project stage. So let's add that here as the second stage. So project, and then basically the names of the fields that we want to keep. So that's the distance. And so we set that one to 1. So saying that we want to keep it. And then also the name, so that we actually know what tour we're talking about. Okay, so with that, we get rid of all the other data. And now let's basically divide the distance by 1,000 in order to convert these meters to kilometers. And actually, it's very easy to do that, because in the GeoNear stage, we can actually specify the distance multiplier property. So distance multiplier. And so here we can specify a number which is then going to be multiplied with all the distances. And so here we specify 0.001. And so that is exactly the same as dividing by 1,000. All right, so let's test our result here now. And that calculation apparently takes some time, but now here we go. And so now you get this nice result here in kilometers. So as you see, the sports lover is the closest tour to the location in Los Angeles that we marked. So it's only 64 kilometers away, which should be something like 40 miles. But again, we're going to do that conversion in a second. For now, I just want to go back to that map in Compass and see if this actually makes sense. So we're still here, and we still have our start locations map. Now the problem here is that we actually cannot really click on any of these points and see what they are, right? But let's just draw a quick circle here again, just to see which are the closest tours and if they match the ones in our output. So it's kind of here, I believe. And so let's include these 5 tours here. Okay, and so their names are the Park Camper, Snow Adventure, Wine Taster, Sports Lover, and Stargazer. And so now when we come here, these ones are actually the first 5 ones. Sports Lover, Park Camper, Wine Taster, Stargazer, and Snow Adventure. So that one that's really close is the Sports Lover, and then the next one is the Park Camper and the Wine Taster. So basically, this one here is going to be the Park Camper, which I believe starts in Las Vegas, and so that makes sense. And then the third one is here, the Wine Taster, close to San Francisco. And so that distance of 800 kilometers, I think, or what was that? Yeah, 600 kilometers, that actually makes kind of sense. So something close to 400 miles here. Okay, and speaking of miles, let's actually do that conversion right now. And so let's do something similar to what we did before. So testing for the unit. And so let's create a multiplier variable. Again, a ternary operator here. So if it's miles, then what should our multiplier be? Well, let's actually very simply Google what 1 meter is in miles. So 1 meter to miles, and Google usually gives us a pretty nice response, and so indeed that it is. So if this is 1 meter, well, then all we need to do is to really multiply our result in meters with this number. So let's copy it here and go back. And so this should be our multiplier in case the unit is meters, or actually in case it's miles. And in case it's meters, well then it's that 0.001 that we used before. Okay? Because we don't want it in meters, because that's not really a readable unit. Instead, we want it in kilometers. And so now we can go ahead and use our multiplier variable here. Give it a save, and let's try it out. So take a look at what we have here in kilometers. So from the previous result, which is 64. And so that should approximately be 40 miles. So let's send that. And well, that was pretty close. So 40.2 miles indeed. And so that's our closest tours. And the most farthest away is the City Wanderer, which I think starts in New York or something. And so that's more than 2,400 miles away from LA. And now if we then set it here to kilometers, then it should be back to getting the value that we had before. Okay, so let's put it back to miles, because I know that most people watching this course are from the US. And so over there, they use miles instead of kilometers. So let's save this here as well to our collection. Get distances to tours from point. Okay, so that's it. That wraps up this lecture, and that's all I had to show you about geospatial data. So this video and the last one should have given you a very great overview of how to work with geospatial data in MongoDB. And as I said before, there's a ton of possibilities of stuff that you can do in your own applications using this kind of data.